Those buses were removed from the Union Station, and we're going to document all of that.
So you believe that those buses held undercover officers, not informants, correct?
I feel very, very confident that everybody that was on those two buses were FBI assets. And I have a high degree of belief that they were actual FBI agents. And I'm sorry to say, ma'am, my objective conclusion is that senior officials at the FBI were deeply involved there. You had a combination of FBI confidential informants, either registered, unregistered, or a volunteer informant, or actual FBI agents, depending upon the group and how significant the group was. Like the agents inserted and say that in the Proud Boys groups that were going to come to D.C., those are most probably actual FBI agents. Whereas some, random Facebook group of patriots from Arizona or something was most likely an informant. So, but they're going down. These men in their high perch, in their position of power and authority, that are walking upon our entire history, our deepest core principles. They're not going to get away with it.
They have so far.
We'll see.
Powerful people in this country, they want to make sure no one hears your voice. They want everyone to look at you like a far-right, crazy conspiracy theorist. Is that who you are?
No, man. I'm a regular American man.
One of the things I learned at 60 Minutes, one of the things my former boss was very good at, was taking long-form investigative stories and investigative storytelling and news that really sort of endures and bringing that to the hard news of the moment. And one of the things that Clay Higgins could do for us was to bring us into what is happening with January 6th now. So, like, for example, I'm working on Victoria White's story, which is a very powerful story and really should have been told 1,000 times already. But because of the neglect of the media today, these stories are falling by the wayside. But that story could be told at any time after January 6th. Clay Higgins' story had to be done now, because this is about what they are learning right now, what they are revealing right now, what they're working on right now. And so it's very, very important that people hear about this, because I feel like we're reaching a watershed moment here. We had Republicans as well as Democrats making it you were like an untouchable if you went to D.C. It didn't matter if you didn't do anything. And nobody wanted to go there. In fact, a lot of conservatives were just like, whew, there, but for the grace of God go I. I'm glad it's not me. And now people are starting to realize and to see there's a massive travesty of justice that has taken place here. And people are demanding the truth. And guess what? People like you and me, we're not backing down. We know that I'll be polite. We know that these people on the other side have a lot of money behind them. We know they have a lot of power. We know they're going to come for us with every single thing they've got. And we're not backing down because there's only one truth. And I was born to do this. That's the only thing I've ever done. It's the only thing I'm ever going to do with my life, besides being a mom, right, and a wife and a sister and all that. And so I'm not backing down from this, because if we back down from this, there's nothing left. So we really don't have a choice. One of the things that Higgins points to, which is probably among the most damning evidence, is the fact that the idea of, taking the Capitol and all these sort of catchphrases that you hear in the narrative that are repeated endlessly by the media afterwards, that's your roadmap to the information operation, right? That's your setup right there. So if you can find those catchphrases inside these chat rooms where people were talking before January 6th, and you can trace those back with their IP addresses to where they were coming from, What Higgins is saying is that when they did that, they found that a lot of those ideas and those messages were traced back to FBI agents who were undercover or FBI informants who were undercover. So that's one part of it. And we know that because we've already seen that with the Whitmer kidnapping plot up in Michigan. That was cited by Joe Biden and many others as being the ultimate example of the existential threat posed by white men in this country and by white supremacists, right? And then what we find out when it goes through the courts is that there were a significant number of FBI agents. In fact, I think by some count there are more than there are people who are actually plotting to kidnap. And then you see people being acquitted one after another because this is all BS. I mean, quite frankly, that's what it is. And so this is the same pattern that you see with January 6th. And then there's other evidence, like seeing people inside the Capitol, police officers going into bathrooms. This is on camera, according to Higgins. And he says that he's seen this video, and they come out and they're dressed out of the bathroom. They're now dressed as Trump supporters or construction workers and so on. And this is before the doors are open. This is when Trump is still speaking. This is before there's been any what they called a breach of the Capitol, which Higgins says isn't really a breach anyway, because those doors are massive and you can't get them open. They had to be opened. So he's still sticking to that, which is something that's come up from the beginning. Republicans, congressional leaders on both sides have been sitting on the evidence, right? And so they've been withholding much of the evidence from the American people and even from defense attorneys. So there's Brady information, exculpatory information that would exonerate many people that has been withheld. So that's one reason. Another reason is that the judges don't allow a lot of this evidence to be admitted in court. I mean, and then you have juries that are completely and utterly biased. You look to the last election. They say that 97 to 98% of D.C. is supposed to have voted Democrat. So what chance does anybody have in a courtroom in D.C. if they voted for Trump? I mean, it's just ridiculous. And then you have judges trying the same cases over and over, and they've stated in the courtroom they're very obvious bias at this point. So, but let's go back to the first point. First and foremost, you have people that have all of this evidence within reach, and they've been sitting on it for 2.5 years. Now, some of them would say to you, well, we didn't have the majority. If they're Republican, they'll say, we didn't have the majority until 10 months ago. Then we had the issue with Kevin McCarthy as Speaker. Okay, well, time's up. Time's up, boys and girls, because people are rotting away in jail. Families have been torn apart. People have lost their jobs. They've lost their homes. I mean, this country has been absolutely trampled. And just because it doesn't affect you directly, maybe you're one of those people that wakes up every day and reads the New York Times, or you're a conservative who thinks, I didn't go to January 6th, I'm going to be okay. I mean, if that's the way you think, then you are not a student of history, and you have a firm grip on reality. Well, I wouldn't have put him out there if I didn't think it was legit, right? If I thought that he was dishonest or didn't have the receipts, we would not have done the story with him or done the interview with him at all. So I do believe that it is legit, particularly because, you can see, Steve, when you watch this interview, I interrogated him, right? I didn't go easy on him. I didn't give him a free pass. I really held his feet to the fire. And I asked him repeatedly, you've seen this evidence yourself. This is firsthand evidence. You know this to be true. How? When can you show us the evidence? So this was not a walk in the park. And it takes some courage in this environment for somebody to sit down and answer those questions and do it willingly and do it for the 3 hours or so that we held him to this interview, in his office on Capitol Hill. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is that, Clay Higgins, you are right. He was a SWAT cop for many, many years. He knows how this is done. When he says to you, we've identified who one of those charter buses, who it belongs to, we have eyewitness testimony, we have whistleblowers who've come forward, he's not making these things up. Part of this investigation he did on his own. In a sense, it was through his office, because immediately following January 6th, the Republicans didn't have control of the House. And so there were no investigative committees, not real ones anyway, besides the show trial that was the January 6th Select Committee. And so he was doing it at first through his office, but since the Republicans took over, he's been on the Oversight Committee. So some of this investigation is done through the Oversight Committee. And then, you have other concurrent committees right now, like the House Administration Subcommittee, which is run by Barry Loudermilk. You've got the Weaponization Committee under Jim Jordan. You've got James Comer and his work going on. And what Higgins said to me is that they're all cooperating to a degree. I mean, they all stay within the parameters of what they're legally able to do, but they're also cooperating. And I really pushed him on the fact that Mike Johnson hasn't released all of the hours yet. He hasn't released all of the evidence. And he said, we'll see on that one. He believes that the American people are going to get access to all of it, and not just what happened inside the Capitol, not just what happened on the Capitol grounds, but all the other video evidence that helps them trace the movement of assets and people. So, for example, those FBI agents or suspected FBI agents that he describes as having gotten off the bus, they want to trace those individuals from Union Station to the escalators to all the way along D.C. Because one thing for people to bear in mind when they assess this information is that Washington, D.C. is probably the most surveilled city on the planet. There are cameras on every street corner. That entire city is surveilled 24/7. It also is a counterterrorism zone, places like the Capitol building. These places they're designed to be secured against nuclear, biological warfare. All right. When you're talking about the kind of security you have there, the idea that a bunch of people could just show up and, blast their way in with no problem whatsoever. That should make, if that were actually true, if that were actually real, it should terrify every American, because what it would say is that we have no defenses. That one of the most secure, significant buildings in America has no real defenses. And that's just ridiculous. It's obviously not true. Interesting, because I've spoken to a number of law enforcement, very senior law enforcement people while I've been investigating this. And one of the first things they tell you is that if they wanted to secure the Capitol, they would have done so. They would have had mounted police officers just as a start, because one mounted cop, whether he's on a horse or on a bike, is worth 10 who's on the ground. Well, you didn't see any of that. So that's why the video makes sense when you watch this video where there's a number of police officers, and then one of them is saying, we've been set up. Look at this. We've been set up. And a couple of them are agreeing with him because they know better than anyone else. And what I would say to you, Steve, about the officers, sitting, drinking coffee, eating a donut, is there are layers to the security at the Capitol. And there are many layers that we don't see that they have access to that were not activated. For example, all that violence that happened in the tunnel, well, you will see, I followed that video to the end. And what you will see when we show it to you in one of the upcoming episodes is that it took one guy about 12 seconds to clear that tunnel. And he had a simunition rifle, right? He had different authorities. He had different weapons. He had different rules of engagement. But the Capitol Police allowed him to come through, and bam, 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 it was done. And if they'd wanted to do that hours before Roseanne Boylan died, hours before when Victoria White was being beaten, hours before these police officers were injured in the tunnel, they could have done that, but they chose not to do so. And that starts to make more sense when you listen to a guy like Higgins and you find out from him that these ideas did not come necessarily from protesters. Some of these ideas came from plants within these groups, because that's consistent with what we've seen happening for years now. Okay, so it's not just new with January 6th. And when Higgins talks about the Ghostbusters, one of the important things that he says is we can trace this. This is not something that just happened. There is an evidence trail here, and we're going to find anyone who's in law enforcement, they understand how these kind of operations work. Like, for example, Higgins talked about the fact that the TSA had handed over lists of everyone who flew to January 6th, to D.C. for January 6th. They handed that over to the ranking Republican on the Select Committee and to Benny Thompson, right, the chairman of the Select Committee. And then the FBI put these people on suspected watch lists. And so you would have heard, I'm sure, from people that that when they're traveling, they're being pulled aside, and they have marshals waiting, and people, security taking them to the plane and keeping them from flying. And that's because of this letter right? And that's because of something that Higgins said, is that he's just learned that there are teams of 3 air marshals that are trailing, putting physical surveillance on every single person that the FBI has put on that suspected terrorist watch list. And some of these people have never been accused of a crime. They've never been charged with a crime. They've never been they don't have any connection towards terrorism whatsoever. And yet they're treated as domestic terrorists. And I want to say, Steve, if you've got 3 air marshals that are tracking people, there's a whole infrastructure behind that of the United States government. You've got people whose job it is to make sure that they know when anyone on the list is actually traveling. Then you've got these guys who are your air marshals. They're reporting back to somebody. There has to be a command center that's running this. You have at least 3 shifts of people every single day that are managing this operation. And this has been going on for almost 3 years. Okay, the expense to the U.S. taxpayer is absolutely unbelievable. Never mind that Higgins said, if you continue to use surface transportation, that is public transportation, but surface as in, not just in the air, not just airplanes, then they continue to trail you. So, I mean, can you imagine, why is it that we are tracking decent American citizens who have never been accused or convicted of a crime and pouring these kind of assets into them? And why has no one on Capitol Hill asked these questions? Why are we only finding out about this now, 3 years in? This is absolutely outrageous. And if you are stupid enough to believe that this is because these people are bad, or these people, the right is bad, or Trump is bad, if you think this is happening because of that, then you can't be helped, because you're just incapable of seeing what is right in front of your eyes, which is that when you have this kind of operation going on, of course it goes all the way to the top. You can't have it happening unless that is the case. And when Higgins confronted Christopher Wray when he testified, you'll notice that Wray just dodges the question every time. And he goes straight to the default, which is, if you're saying that the violence was orchestrated by senior levels of the FBI, then you're wrong, right? And this is what they get away with. And then they attack the messenger. They'll attack me. They'll attack Higgins. They'll attack you. And they say, and there are, when I refer to powerful people that control the flow of information in this country, look at who some of them are. Elon Musk is suing some of them, right? They go all the way from Media Matters Now to Facts First USA, where David Brock is continuing to do his work, where he's now going after people, trying to make sure that there's this invisible wall between everything that you say and everything that I report, and by all those people out there in the United States who want the truth, right? They make sure that those people never hear the truth. And that's how they plan to get away with it, by isolating us and using the powers that we have given them, because they do serve the people. They have every intention of using that power to suppress us permanently. There's no coming back from this if they prevail. Higgins is not the only person on Capitol Hill who's investigating. I mentioned James Comer, Barry Loudermilk. I asked Barry Loudermilk, is this potentially the biggest setup in American history? And he said potentially yes. So these are people who have seen some of the evidence. We're talking about destruction of documents. This is how scared these people are. I know that he was looking forward to getting past the whole McCarthy thing so that they could get back to work. He made that very clear to me. And I also know that his teams, what they discovered was that after the committee had said those records had been destroyed, what they learned was that they had given the transcripts of the interviews that they had done with White House personnel. They had given those to the White House, the Biden White House, and the transcripts of their interviews with Secret Service agents, they had given copies of those to the Department of Homeland Security. And in addition, they had supplied information to Jack Smith and to Fannie Willis, right, for those prosecutions against Trump. So on the one hand, you have a House committee. Essentially, those transcripts and those documents belong to the House. And you're denying the House, other members of the House, access to those records, but you're providing them to corrupt DAs for political prosecutions, and you're giving them to the White House and the Department of Homeland Security. I mean, which is pretty outrageous. But Loudermilk has been, he's been pushing hard at his committee to get this information out. And he's been frustrated. There's a lot of red tape on the Hill that ties up the hands of these people. And so that's something, that people need to bear in mind when they get frustrated. But it's been too long, right? It's been too long at this point. And they're under attack all the time. They've got so many people in their own party trying to subvert them as they pursue this, that, it's quite something when the threat is not just coming from across the aisle, but it's coming from your own side. And that's why people need to speak up, because unless people speak up, these people are just going to continue to suppress this information. But it doesn't just change it for Trump. It changes it for every January 6th defendant, for every single one. You realize that there are still people being arrested. There were people arrested yesterday. There probably will be somebody arrested today. Okay, they haven't stopped. And this is what I think people just fail to grasp. If it's not affecting them directly, if that knock isn't coming to your front door, you kind of think it's not happening. That is absolutely not true. Americans really need to realize that the Republicans have had the majority for 10 months, and people are still being arrested, and they're sitting on this evidence.